There are a lot that believe that if you start with certain constraints, that actually allows innovation to flourish. And the fact is that there's a lot of industries and a lot of things that we do on a daily basis, both in our businesses and our lives, that the constraints allow us to succeed, right? We call it the rules of the road for a reason. In medical devices, in space exploration, in the pharmaceutical industry, in heavy machinery around robotics, all of these are very kind of dangerous and risk-intense of spaces. They have to have constraints. But at the same time, if you look at those spaces, they're some of the most innovative. We need to be able to look at AI innovation the same way, that we need to be able to start with standards. We need to be able to start with these frameworks so we can have rules of the road so we can move forward and take those risks without doing damage. I think it's also important to understand that being adaptive in the way that we look at those constraints and that governments is really critical. And the reason why is we will be more effective and we'll be more using our resources more wisely if we realize that over time AI is going to evolve. It's not only going to evolve quickly, but we know for a fact that we're just at the start of the game. And in, again, 6 months, 8 months, in 18 months, things are going to be really, really different. And so adaptive models will be able to account for that. It will account for things like, learning, questioning, making sure you have, a culture where you can ask questions and review what you're doing, and adapting a lot of concepts around continuous improvement, agile. I mean, these are methodologies that we're using in our businesses that can easily be applied to the idea of governance. I think there needs to be two realms when an organization is thinking about governance. I think needs to be frameworks and processes and a certain level of adaptive and dynamic constraints around it. At the same time, there has to be a culture and ethics that support it, the informal aspects. And I think if you have those two realms, then you're able to create governance frameworks. You have a strategy and you have your priorities that be able to look at how AI is evolving in the marketplace. But more specifically, if it's part and it goes across the functions, then your product development team, your marketing team, your DevOps teams, your sales teams, everybody understands that there's a certain obligation around the constraints and the risks of AI, the ethical and the societal considerations. At the same time, you have a workforce and you have teams that have that wisdom and that expectation that every 3 months, every quarterly review, you're going to be able to or be obligated to look at your governance frameworks and understand, are they working right, and what do we have to adapt them or change them? When you think about governance and AI innovation, typically you think about the data scientist, the decision scientist, or the DevOps pro, the people that have been in the data and the analytics for a very long time. Leaders of organizations now need to understand that it's no longer in their domain, that the majority of employees that are working in highly complex data and technology-driven organizations are data employees, right, at different levels. And so one needs to think about almost all employees being data-driven. I mean, I would argue most employees, even those that work for hardware and in industrials and even in retail and in different logistics and transportation, they are also using data, software platforms. And I think it's really important to understand that these data employees now have a higher obligation to look at how AI innovation is going to impact them. Because whether they're looking and working with AI products in front of them or it's embedded behind them, running the data they're using, they now have an obligation to understand kind of what the risks are. And with that, strong AI governance and those frameworks will help these employees kind of navigate. As AI evolves and innovates, and you start to think about how you want to treat government frameworks, what your strategy and priorities are, first, all employees are data employees, but I think in different roles and different responsibilities, you have to approach it in different ways. What we see is that at the C-suite, or at the functional leadership level, there has to be a few priorities. One is this idea that AI has its own value chain, and it goes across the company's value chain. It can't be in a black box anymore. The idea that governance and the governance around AI is going to sit in compliance is not dynamic thinking. It will not be able to respond and react enough to some of the risks and the opportunities in AI. So as a leader of your function or your organization, you need to really stop and think about, okay, so these governance frameworks, these priorities we're going to put in place are going to go across the organization, across the functions, and everybody needs to be able to be responsive and responsible for them. I think the other aspect too is there's this whole theme that, a lot of the governance policy regulations, the standards, technical terms, these are being created outside of your organization. And so you need, as a leader, as a functional leader, you need to be able to be the one to invest in that and to make it a priority to engage with that. So instead of being inward thinking about your innovation and your governance, you really need to be kind of proactively going out into working with stakeholders. I think the last part that can't be said enough is that values and priorities start at the top. So when it comes to tough decision making, unconscious bias, and ethical decisions also have to be at the functional leadership and at the company leadership level. Those, I think, are the most important priorities that a top leader at an organization has to think about when it comes to AI innovation. When you think about evolving and developing governance frameworks that are going to kind of respond and work with the quickly evolving aspects of AI and the innovation around AI, there is a lot of work to be done. But if one were to kind of stop and think about, what are the first three things I could be doing, I would prioritize these. I think it's really important to take the time and the resources and make the investment in engaging the ecosystem. The stakeholders, the decision makers, the policy leaders, the standard bodies, these are all organizations and activities that are happening outside the borders of your company. You need to be able to invest in those. You need to be able to participate in them. If you are just reactive and you wait for everything to shuffle, to pan out, you're going to be too late. At the same time, if you're not proactively involved, this evolution is going to keep on happening, and you won't have a seat at the table. The other aspect is that, creating an adaptive governance structure is really important. Look at your governance structure right now and start to look at the more agile methodologies, priorities around continuous improvement, and make your governance structures more adaptive. But always remember that it's going to start with people and ethics first. It's also, I think, the obligation of kind of lifelong learning to understand that if you're going to be a competitive candidate and a successful employee in an organization, you need to be very smart about the different realms of governance, right? You need to be able to understand what's going on in the policy world. You need to be able to understand what's happening in industry standards. Again, it cannot just be a black box living in the domains that it was in the past.